Ladies and gentlemen, if you could all find a seat, please. Good morning. Good morning. If I could have your attention, please. Please, your attention. Thank you. We need to get going, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, we've got a long day today, and those of you that know me know that I am about the worst in the world of holding people on their time schedules when I'm hearing something I want to hear. So with that acknowledgement, we need to proceed. Good morning. Welcome to day one of a two-day public workshop to receive information regarding Bay Delta fisheries resources. Day two will be held tomorrow. The notice of workshop mentions a day three on Wednesday, but at this time it does not appear to be needed. This workshop will be part of phase two of the State Water Board's review of the 2006 Water Quality Control Plan for the Bay Delta Estuary. Phase one, which is still ongoing, addresses San Joaquin River flows and Southern Delta water quality issues. Phase two addresses potential modifications to the remainder of the Bay Delta Plan and focuses on fish and wildlife beneficial uses. I'm Charlie Hoppen, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. With me today, to my left, Vice Chair Frances Spivey Weber. To her left, Board Member Felicia Marcus. To my right, Board Member Tam Doduk. And to her right, Stephen Moore. We're also being joined today by Rich Satkowski, Senior Engineer, Karen Nia, Senior Engineer. You got it right, huh, Karen? I mispronounced Karen's name for years, and she thought I was joking with her, and it was just my, anyhow, I apologize profusely. And Diane Riddle, Senior Environmental Program Manager, and Brock Bernstein, a subcontractor for ICF International, who is the workshop facilitator. As all of you that have been here before know, I need to go through the evacuation procedures, which I would like to think would be intuitive. But if you do hear an alarm, please proceed through the back of the building, through the exits and down the stairways across the street to Chavez Park. Back to the workshop. This workshop is being held in accordance with public notice dated June 22nd, 2012 and revised August 15th, 2012. It is an informal workshop. The State Board will not take any formal action today, and there will be no sworn testimony or cross-examination. For all of you that have spent an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time preparing for this, the idea that it's an informal workshop seems to de-emphasize the importance of what we have here today. And I guess technically it is an informal workshop, but it is a very, very important process. So please do not be put off by the term informal. The State Board and the staff do plan to ask questions of the panelists, although the notice states that the workshops will end at 5 p.m. To accommodate the various panels, we may go a little bit past 5 today and end at 5:25. Why not 5:26? I don't know, but 5:25 is what I have in my script. There will be approximately 15 minutes for questions after each presentation and a time for questions at the end of day two. There will be no court reporter present today. We are, however, broadcasting this workshop on the internet and preparing an audio and video recording. So please, when you come to the podium to speak, identify yourself and whom it is you're representing. We'll hear a brief introduction from staff and Dr. Bernstein. Then we'll hear from various panels. After the panels have presented their information tomorrow, we'll hear comments from the public. If you intend to speak tomorrow, please fill out blue speaker cards today or tomorrow. Give them to our staff. If you're not sure whether you wish to speak or not, please mark the card as if necessary. In order to ensure that all participants have an opportunity to participate, comments may be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. That will depend on the amount of time we have in front of us. Certainly, we want to hear what you all have to say. To avoid repetition and in the interest of time, if there are groups of you with the same comments, I would encourage you to pick a spokesperson to put forward your comments. I'll turn this meeting over to Rich Satkowski, who will make a brief presentation followed by Dr. Bernstein. I would like to apologize before we begin to all of you. I missed the last workshop, not through indifference, but because of something that I couldn't avoid. Certainly we heard a lot of feedback. There's a lot of angst and pent-up anxiety, if you will, over workshops like this, it's our intention to hear all you have to say and to be able to draw conclusions from what you have. When the presenters make their presentation, I realize that people sometimes are reluctant to state a conclusion, what a possible solution might be. To whatever degree you can do that certainly would be helpful to us. I would suspect at the end of these workshops we will schedule something else where we're able to synthesize all we've heard from the experts and come up with a conclusion. I think anyone would be naive to think that anyone that's going to be presenting, any panel that's going to be presenting, will have the simple solution to the dilemma that we have in front of us. All of these will be incremental parts, hopefully, that we will be able to put together in a way that addresses the synergies of all the different effects and come up with a functional solution as we go forward. As you all know, that's easy to say and very difficult to accomplish, but that certainly is our intention. One thing that I would ask of you, under Port of Cologne, we have the responsibility of dealing with beneficial uses. At times, people talk about the beneficial uses, if you will. At times, we talk about the fish. It would be very helpful to me as people are making their presentation if they winnow down to what the beneficial uses they're talking about. Obviously, we have competing beneficial uses in this system. Hopefully, we're able to make them all whole, and hopefully they will all receive equal emphasis. But when you're talking about something, it would be very helpful to me if the points you're making are specific, if not general, to all the beneficial uses, if they're specific to which of the beneficial uses you're speaking about. With that, Rich, would you like to take over? Oh, yes. Oh, one more thing. All of these, would you please reach down? The president's not going to be calling this afternoon. The governor's not going to be calling this morning. If your wife's out of something you need to get at the store on the way home, it'll wait till you leave. If you would, please turn them all off. Thank you. That was it. Rich.
Good morning, Chair Hoppen and Vice Chair Spivey Weber, members of the board. I'm Rich Sitkowski, Senior Engineer with the division. Also with me is Karen Nia, a Senior Engineer, and Diane Riddle, the Environmental Program Manager. I went over the background for these workshops and the State Water Board's planning activities at the last workshop, and will repeat the information briefly for those folks who were not in attendance. And then turn it over to Brock, who will provide an overview for the day. As been discussed in other workshops and meetings, the planning efforts are set up in 4 different phases. Phase 1 includes the review and update of the San Joaquin River flow and South Delta water quality objectives. And these are for the protection of the agricultural beneficial uses and the associated program implementation. The State Water Board staff anticipates releasing a draft environmental document in support of Phase 1 shortly, and with a workshop to follow. Phase 2, which is the subject of today's workshop, includes a comprehensive review and update of the Bay Delta Plan focused on fish and wildlife beneficial uses, and not including the San Joaquin River flows, which are part of Phase 1. I will speak to the next steps for this phase later. Phase 3 includes modifications to water rights and implementation changes to the Bay Delta Plan from Phases 1 and 2. This phase will commence following completion of Phases 1 and 2. And finally, Phase 4 includes the development and implementation of flow requirements for the priority delta tributaries. This work will proceed on various timelines for the different priority tributaries. To assist the board in gathering and assessing technical and scientific information related to the comprehensive review of the Bay Delta Plan, the State Board scheduled a series of workshops. The State Water Board issued a save the date notice in April of 2012, then in June issued a formal notice for the workshops, followed by a revised notice in August. The workshops are just the beginning of Phase 2, and the Phase 2 process will not be the only opportunity for interested parties to provide information related to Phase 2. This is the second of 3 workshops to receive the scientific and technical information related to the Bay Delta fisheries. The next workshop is in November, and we'll focus on the analytical tools for evaluating water supply, hydrodynamics, and hydropower effects. Pursuant to the public notice, the specific topics for discussion today include flow, cold water pool, habitat, and water project operational constraints needed to reasonably protect pelagic species, including delta smelt and longfin smelt, and Central Valley steelhead, Sacramento River winter run, Central Valley spring run, Central Valley fall run, and Central Valley late fall run Chinook salmon, and the interaction of these issues with non-flow related factors. Since the State Water Board recently gathered and received a large amount of scientific material related to the workshop topics during the 2009 periodic review and the 2010 Delta Flow Criteria proceedings, in the notice, the State Board specifically requested information that was not addressed in those proceedings. As discussed in the notice, the Delta Flow Criteria report suggests that the flows that would be needed in the Delta ecosystem if fishery protection was the sole purpose for which its waters were put to beneficial use. The report did not consider any balancing of public trust resource protection with public interests needs of water. As part of its update to the 2006 Bay Delta Plan, the State Water Board will consider other public interests needs for water, including municipal, industrial, agricultural, power, and recreational uses. The questions outlined in the notice include the following. What additional scientific and technical information should the State Board consider to inform the potential changes to the Bay Delta Plan related to the Bay Delta fishery resources that were not addressed in the 2009 report and 2010 Delta Flow Criteria report? What is the level of scientific certainty or uncertainty regarding that information? What changes to the Bay Delta Plan should the State Water Board consider based on the information in order to address existing circumstances and changing circumstances such as climate change and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, BDCP? Also, how should the State Water Board address scientific uncertainty and other changing circumstances, including climate change, invasive species, and other issues? And finally, what kind of adaptive management and collaboration, short, medium, and long term, in other words, monitoring and special study programs should the State Water Board consider related to the Bay Delta fishery resources and this update to the Bay Delta Plan? We received written summaries from the 16 parties shown on the slide and received also more than 250 additional documents and other materials from the commenters listed on the slide. All these materials have been shared with the workshop participants and have been posted on the State Water Board website, and we are in the process of posting the additional 250 plus set of materials. And then this slide shows the anticipated timeline for the Phase 2 comprehensive review of the Bay Delta Plan. After the technical workshops, Dr. Bernstein will develop a draft summary report on the issues and on the workshop's key points, including areas of agreement and disagreement, sources of disagreement, and degree of certainty. Once the draft report is released, participants will have an opportunity to comment on the report before it is considered final. After the report is final, Dr. Bernstein will present the summary report to the State Water Board. Based on the information received at the workshops and other sources, the State Board will develop a technical report outlining the scientific basis for the proposed modifications to the Bay Delta Plan. The scientific report will be part of the staff report and environmental document prepared in support of potential changes to the Bay Delta Plan. The draft scientific basis report is planned to be released in the winter of 2013, and the draft environmental document is targeted for release in the fall of 2013. Final consideration of adoption of any changes to the Bay Delta Plan by the State Water Board is planned by the summer of 2014. This concludes my presentations. Diane, Karen, and I are available to answer any questions, and if there are no questions, we'll turn it over to Brock.
I'm going to make a brief comment. Rich touched on something that I hope did not go without notice. He made a reference to our now famous flow report and the fact that we will be looking at other causes and effects. When we did the flow report, we looked at flows, and period, end of subject, and what flows might be optimal for fish. We did not take any of the balancing into consideration and the other effects that might result from those hypothetical flows, if you will. I know some people like to focus on that flow report. From my perspective, and I'm speaking for myself, we would benefit greatly from what Rich said, and that is hearing the other factors that come into that. In my opinion, that's why we're here. So thank you.
Thanks very much. So as you can see from the agenda, there are a number of panels that have been organized for today. Each panel consists of a number of presentations, and those have been fairly well integrated and organized by the respective members of each panel, even if they come from different organizations. And they've scheduled their time to allow for 70 minutes of presentation time and 15 minutes of Q&A time at the end of the presentations for that panel. So I would encourage you to ask questions to clarify points that are not clear during and immediately after presentations, but to hold your more overarching questions until you've heard from all the panel members in that group, because they may be sort of talking or teeing off of each other and picking up threads that each of them have started. The other thing that you guys should know is even if your microphone is off, we learned at the first workshop that people listening in remotely can hear your side comments. So unless you're going to say something exceptionally complimentary about somebody in the room, excuse me, you should probably be quiet even if your microphone is off. And the one final thing, several panels have asked if they could have additional members of their teams available to answer questions from you, even if they did not make a presentation. So you may hear a question being pitched to part of their team member, another team member who's in the audience, but who didn't make a presentation, and we've worked that out ahead of time. So there aren't just random people standing up in the audience and making comments. Peter.
Peter, before you begin, to my colleagues, I have found it, and whether it's professionally correct or not, to ask questions when they arise when I hear a comment. If you'd like to wait, that's fine. If you hear something that you feel compelled to ask a question on in the middle of somebody's presentation, I think that's your privilege. So please don't look at me and say, may I speak? If you have a question, I want to hear it, they'll want to hear it, and please have no reservation about that, unless it puts us here until 11 o'clock tonight, and then I may start giving you kind of harsh looks. With that, Peter.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Hoppin and the members of the board. I'm going to pass the mic in a moment to Sam Harada, who, from the Delta Science Program, is the person who's actually been managing this particular panel. But I just wanted to make a couple of overview comments about how we put these invited panels together for you.
If you could center up on that microphone, these are probably the poorest microphones any of you pros will ever speak before. So if you would kind of address it like you're strangling a chicken, please.
Okay. Yes, that.
The country comes out every once in a while. I've really never strangled a chicken.
Yeah. So is that a little better? Okay, great. So with these invited panels, what we've tried to do is to cover the range of disciplines necessary to answer the questions that the staff pose to us. And in addition to that, we tried to select leaders who represent and can speak for groups of scientists on the various challenges that go into these very major questions. And the main question the main point I wanted to make is that all of these panels, but particularly this panel, have gone far over and beyond what we had actually expected in the Delta Science Program. You know, these are very busy people, and they've set things aside to really make this a priority. And the level of discussion that has gone on has been at a very, very high level, and I think, as you'll hear from this presentation, in terms of helping define what we know and where the uncertainties that Chair Hoppin mentioned, this panel has gone a long way to answer that. So I'd like to pass the mic to Sam Harada just to introduce the panel themselves and make a few other remarks about the what's coming.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Chairman Hoppen, members of the board. I just want to say it was a privilege working with this panel, and it's always a learning experience working with a group of people of this caliber, and the most exciting part of my job. And I would also like to restate the, emphasize the amount of work that they put in. They spent much of the last month. I don't think there was a day went by when they weren't doing something on preparing for this workshop. I'll go ahead and introduce the panel. Not in any particular order. We have Ted Summer. He's a program manager and a senior biologist for the Department of Water Resources. John Largere, he's a professor of coastal oceanography at UC Davis. Randy Baxter is a senior biologist with the Department of Fish and Game. Kenny Rose is a professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Science at Louisiana State University, and not unknown to the Delta. He's done his work for us here before. Eric Danners with the Fisheries Ecology Division, Southwest Fisheries Science Center with the National Marine Fisheries Service. And Brad Cavallo is president and senior scientist for Kramer Fish Sciences. And unless there's any other questions for me, I will hand it off to Kenny Rose.
Kenny, just 1 second. Mr. Bobker, those of you in the back of the room, there are seats in the front. I always like to be able to keep my eye on you, Gary, and I have a hard time seeing that far back, so if you want to come up forward. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to make sure that I understand how this works before I begin. Okay. I think I'm controlling it now. So you heard about the panel. How we're organized here is we have three spokesmodels who are going to summarize what was in the report. You may wonder why I've been selected as one, but that's another question for later. We'll have three people represent the panel, and then we'll move and have 4 or 5 minutes for each panel member to say something that's not representative of the panel, but is related to the deliberations we had, but it's their views of things. These were 2 questions that were posed to the panel. I won't read them extensively other than what additional scientific information should the State Water Board consider? And the second one was how should the State Water Board address scientific uncertainty and changing circumstances? This is the esteemed panel that you've just introduced to, and I'm going the wrong way. So what process did we use as the panel? We were selected by the Delta Science Program, as you heard. We had multiple conference calls. There was an initial meeting that some people attended, others attended by webinar. Each panel member, having been briefed, then submitted initial ideas. We collated, consolidated, synthesized those into a single document. That draft was iterated among the panel members, and then the report was submitted, and that's the one that I think you've seen that's on the website. And then here we are today, reporting to you. It's counterintuitive. Our organization of the report is around 3 themes that are directly related to the questions posed to us, but also were 3 themes for, I think, in general for the workshops. Implications of science for management. The second theme was need for improved science to reduce uncertainty, and the third was key emerging science. And now I'm going to summarize theme 1 things from the report, then someone else would do theme 2, someone else would do theme 3, and then we'll each have 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to make additional comments. So the good news is we've done the first thing so far for today's presentation. That is, what was the process we used? Each of us will each of the 3 speakers will summarize the report, and as I mentioned, a brief statement. So in the first section of the report, which is theme 1, these will all be numbered 1-1, 1-2. For theme 2, it'll be 2-1, 2-2. So if you want to try to keep track, you can. You'll also notice that before we get into this one, some of our, we didn't answer, the first question we answered directly, and the second question the information, the answers are there, but they're in the organization we used for the answering the first question. So the key uncertainties, you may have to do a little peck and hunt within the text to find it, because we organized it by the key issues. So the first bullet that we came up with, 1.1, was about multiple species, correlations, and nonlinear responses. And our emphasis here was that the objectives, the water quality objectives, can have different effects on the species of concern. And we would caution about this seemingly appearance of overlaying species on top of species to derive a single set. Because you're really not considering, in our opinion, the synergistic effects. That is, you may get even more bang for your buck when you consider a slight change to benefit multiple species, as well as trying to avoid unintended consequences. That is, there are times some objectives can affect one species and have a negative effect on the other. Excuse me. A second aspect of this, so that's the multiple species part, is the correlations. And of course, you're well aware that objectives can affect each other. But, you know, as a panel, some of these points we're obligated to include, but not necessarily that you don't know about them or that they're insights, but they're obligatory. So, for example, management of X2 can affect cold water pool, which affects temperature management for downstream salmonids, and I think probably everyone's aware of that. Just a reminder. And the third point is about the biological responses. The fish responses to the objectives are often nonlinear, and that is that the response to some percent increase in flow is very different at different flow levels. And that'll come up again later, I think. And we all know that, but there were a lot of plots of things, abundances against X2, and that's a relationship that should be looked at in this regard. The second bullet or key part of the theme 1 is the monitoring of effectiveness. And what we mean here is that in critical cases, and we may be using the wrong jargon, but what we call compliance monitoring needs to go another step towards effectiveness monitoring. And that is, this system is excellent and everyone's very good at knowing whether the salinity objectives were met at a location at a particular time. In some critical cases, we recommend and suggest that you then measure what you think that objective was supposed to achieve in the biology, such as the infamous fish growth, fish distribution, things like that, at least on a local scale. Similarly, this forces you to define habitat. Now, since I have the microphone, this is one of my personal things. I would avoid the term habitat. You should say what you mean. Because it means many things to many people. So if you mean warm temperature, say warm temperature. Don't call it habitat. I can feel the cold stare of several people behind me, though. It's a little unnerving speaking this way without watching them.
If it's any comfort, Kenny, I'm smiling.
That's good. The third bullet under this theme 1 is water quality under future configurations. And again, some of this is obvious, but we think it would be helpful to have it all in one place in this report. Anticipate some of the infrastructure changes. Everyone probably here knows more about the dual conveyance than I do, but there's other things going on, including climate change. And we're not saying that now you have to design objectives for then, because it's a repeated process, the evaluation. But now is the time to start collecting the data and information you're going to need in 5 years, 10 years, to be able to assess the third or fourth round of water quality objective revisions. The time is now. You know, fish are an annual species, so even if you start now and get 5 years, it's marginal. So it's important to get started now and a plan for how to do the analysis. And it's difficult because some of these changes have not been observed yet, and so historical information is tricky.
Ken, I'll ask you a question that goes a bit further, and it's certainly not my intention to ask you a loaded question, but it has significant consequences.
Yes.
As we deal with climate change and the unknowns that will be associated with it, would you as a scientist presume that it will be our task to save all species that might be negatively affected by climate change. I mean, I think it would be a logical assumption that some species, some of which may not be in part of our discussion today, might benefit, others may not. And there again, we've got the unknown of not knowing how much, how soon, to what extent when we deal with this. But as we go forward, there seems to be a broadening consensus that we are dealing with significant climate change. Where, from a scientific standpoint, do you draw the line? And I know that's a tough question, but it's something that we need to be considering here. So,
yeah, as you can
welcome
see me
Sacramento.
starting to twitch. I don't know how you got that question from what I said, but ignoring that part of it, it's a very valid question. I'd rather come back to that and afterwards, because it's not appropriate. I sometimes give flippant answers, and that's not a.
I do too. So I'll let you answer the question when it's appropriate, and if you'd like to pass the baton off to one of the other panelists. But I think the concept is something that we need to be considering as we make this decision that's before us.
Absolutely. 1.4. 1.4 under theme 1 is the use of summary indicators of hydrology is appropriate, but it needs to be for very specific purposes. And this again is a fish view of, or a fisheries person view of things. So summary measures, outflow, I to E, are useful for some purposes, but they don't necessarily describe how water is routed through the system in sufficient detail to address everything. And there seems to be a tendency to migrate to these summary measures. The specifics of where, when, and how much water matter to fish. So they're useful, but their relevancy should be confirmed in the context of how they're being used, particularly the summary measures. Our bullet on, still theme 1, but the 5th bullet in our report is proceed. Just do it. New data analyses and models are continuously being developed. I'm working on 1, others are 2. Don't wait. And we don't think you are, but this is also for a reminder. Use what's well documented, readily available, and transparent, the models and the data. And make sure, though, that the process has a mechanism for inserting new information, which this workshop is probably a good example of that kind of mechanism. We always think the next one's going to be the breakthrough, and it most often is not. It's incremental. So our 6th point, boy, I wish I didn't have this in here after your comments, opening comments. State the beneficial uses of water affected by the objectives. And we understand this is not a comment on your process that you take. It again is obligatory, and the key part here is the transparency and clarity of the process. And of course, no matter how hard you try, it will never be perfect. But it's very important in the contentious atmosphere that we're operating, or you're operating in, that it be very clear when things are factored in, such as water supply, agricultural use. And that's what we mean by beneficial uses. So I did hear that part of your comment. 1.7, an issue that is an emerging issue that will be readdressed again in, I think, theme 3, is the short-term variability. Many of these objectives are based on these aggregate values, not just outflow, but also outflow on a monthly basis. And averages and sums can mask important short-term variability that is very important to some of the fish responses. And that's reflected in some of the documents already about flushes and turbidity and things like that. Again, it's just a reminder that fish are operating on different scales than sometimes we like to summarize things. And then 1.8, another one you may not like to see, is consider other stressors. We understand that separating flow from other stressors is a way to make the problem more tractable, and it's modular and stuff. But at some point, there needs to be a reckoning of that flow is related to many of these other stressors, such as contaminant exposure, things like that. And it's just a reminder that any approach that tries to make things modular has to deal with it at some point as a single unified problem. So
One point on
yes.
that last one about other stressors, I think there's a misconception really about the board's relationship to other stressors. We are very much aware that there are other stressors, but one thing that we will be looking for, or at least that I will be looking for, is how do you determine, what is the relationship between flow and those other stressors? Which ones stand on their own? Which ones are flow related? Which ones are related to other things? But flow's a tiny piece
Right.
in a bigger piece. So it's not that we are just totally flow focused, but for many of the stressors, there seems to be a flow component, and so I want to tease that out.
Good. So I don't have to answer any question on that, right? That's good. So the Part 1 summary, which is our report summarized related to Theme 1, just to reiterate, was the multiple species correlations and nonlinear responses, the monitoring the biological effectiveness, not just that the objective was achieved, but the biological benefits were at least monitored, the water quality under future system configurations, and we'll make a note, we have a question to come back to that one. Using of summary indicators should be done with caution. Proceed. Again, the beneficial uses of water which come into this process in a regulatory process, but is very important for transparency. Consider short-term variability, and then make sure that other stressors are considered so that that the entire picture can be understood. And with that, we'll go to our second spokesperson, which I think is John.
Yeah.
And he'll be just summarizing the report for Theme 2.
Well, good morning, and thanks for the pleasure of talking in front of the board. A little bit closer. Okay, lean right in. I just think I'm Frank Sinatra. How about that? That might be better. So, the danger of having a research scientist talking
You
about...
aren't here today to hear music, John.
To hear about what we don't know. It could be a long list, but through the panel we really try to give a lot of attention to what are those unknowns which can help the water board make better decisions, which are going to give you. So perhaps we can change the slide to the next one. Oh, I'm doing it myself. Another button. The left side button, that's what you said. It's kind of, there we are. So uncertainty can be reduced. That's what we believe through science. The uncertainty we're talking about is that when you make a management decision or a policy choice, there's an outcome and one's never totally certain about it. Improved understanding and knowledge should reduce that uncertainty and have can cut both ways, really. I mean, in the sense of the not knowing the uncertainty means that you might be missing a benefit that's bigger than you thought it was to your action. Of course, it might cut the other way and you might have some unintended consequences. So that's the premise of this next section. The first point we're going to talk about are models. Increasingly, we have models that can quantify the benefit to fish of different management options. And secondly, they can identify these unintended consequences. And perhaps most important is they can actually trade off one against the other. But what we identify here is that in assessing these benefits, we need to get more finely scaled models. So it's not okay to take an annual average in many cases. We really need to look at perhaps the seasonal flows. Perhaps we need to look at the flows in different tributaries or for different life stages, the juvenile stage versus adult stage. Or perhaps we need to understand what the effect of flow is on growth, which might be completely different to the effect on reproduction. So these sort of details are increasingly coming into models, and this, we believe, will reduce uncertainty. So this is we identified 6 things where science can really push on it and make progress. And then the final bullet at the bottom of the screen is including primary factors other than flow rates, which pertains to the discussion we just had, that there are many factors and we need to recognize that they all interrelate to each other. The second is that a lot of the information we have about fish-environment interactions is correlative. We've watched the fish go up and down and the flows go up and down, or whatever ways you want to view it, but we really stress the need for more field experimental evaluation, not necessarily to make experiments out of nothing, but we are altering the flow all the time. And as we do that, we should be looking more carefully at the changes to the beneficial uses, to the specific fish, etc., including streams in the flow. So not only looking at flow in the mid-range of the operational range, but towards the ends of it as well. This is an iterative learning process. We have expectations, and in the beginning we don't always get them right, but eventually the outcome should match the expectation to the degree possible. There's uncertainty due to a lack of knowledge, but there's also uncertainty to the inherent nature of these systems. They're never perfectly predictable. So we gave an example there, flashed the fall low salinity habitat study and the McCallum River study as examples of it. I think Kenny said in the beginning, what we're really doing is summarizing the written report. This is the same material, and there's more detail in that and references, etc. The aims of field evaluation are maybe obvious. We want to confirm the benefits that we think we're getting, and again, that cross-references to earlier part of Kenny's, one of his report points. We want to improve the mechanistic understanding, and that comes up all the time, that if you understand mechanism, you can actually look forward and you can actually use some of your knowledge in changing altered systems rather than correlative, which can break down over time. You reduce the uncertainty in assessment of benefits, that's kind of obvious, and through this hopefully refine water quality objectives. So the third then is where I come from. An ocean scientist, studies estuaries, and I very much believe in that, well, estuaries are the interaction of rivers and oceans. And because we manage the watershed and the river so much, we have tended to overlook the ocean until recently. And there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how this huge and rather productive upwelling system offshore changes. How does that play into the bay? We highlighted 3 points, and this could be expanded a long way. The first is maybe the most obvious, the anadromous fish, the salmon, for example, and we had good examples in 2005 and 6 when the salmon didn't do so well in the ocean, had a big impact when the population came back to the rivers and estuaries. The second is a recent study that I was part of, where we looked at it's more in the outer bay, at the data on fish at benthic or bottom-dwelling fish and crab and shrimp, and how, with a change in ocean conditions around about 1999, led to a huge change in populations. And in a number of these populations, there's like a 10-fold increase. Things like Dungeness crab and sole, etc. Seem to, mechanistically and correlatively, seem to be explained by the ocean. That is in the outer, central San Pablo Bay areas, but we didn't look all that much further than that. So there's a connection to the ocean via dispersal, that there are many life stages that spend time in the ocean, maybe as planktonic larvae, etc., and we need to understand that a bit better. And thirdly, the trophic subsidy, the food in the form of nutrients and plankton that comes from the ocean. We see marine plankton well into the bay. We see nutrients coming into the bay. We don't know quite how far they are used. The nitrate that comes from the ocean, undoubtedly, we've not done the study, but undoubtedly dominates in Central Bay. And somewhere as you move into the bay, it's become less and less important. We don't know how far that is. And some maybe non-intuitive things like the gravitational circulation, the seawater is denser than the fresh water, actually increases as the river flow increases. So while you push the salt back, you actually speed up the recycling and bringing water into the bay as well. So there are a lot of things along those lines. I better move on before I stay on that for 10 minutes. The fourth item, I think, is not a surprise. There's a lot of discussion right now about nutrients, and we need to resolve exactly what effect this is having as you move further up the ecosystem. So 3 bullets here. The first is there has been a shift in phytoplankton community. long-term changes in the species composition, and apparently a reduced food value for zooplankton. And there has been a change in nutrient loading. Increased wastewater loading is the primary driver of that, and higher ammonium. And this appears to be causing changes in phytoplankton. What we don't know is the influence on fish. To date, there's no quantitative link from that to the fish, although there seems like there should be logically a link. And we imagine that there has to be a link to some species in some regions, in some seasons, and some life stages. But how important is it? Is it really a primary thing or not? That's where there's uncertainty, because we do not have the science. And then again, the other environmental stresses change in parallel. Our whole ecosystem become more and more populated, and there are a lot of things that come from that, wastewater and many other things, which all track each other. The fifth uncertainty we feel is entrainment, that assessment of entrainment can be improved quite a lot. The first bullet there is quantifying proportional entrainment. So as you know, we quantify how much is entrained, and you compare it to how many fish are there. And we feel like there's an uncertainty in both of those numbers, both the total population abundance and the number entrained. There's a protocol, but it's based on a lot of untested assumptions and calculations. Given the importance of this factor, we feel like there is too much uncertainty, and we need to try and tighten it up a bit. Secondly, we may have data on entrainment rate, but we don't always know how it changes or what the explanatory variables are. So something, entrainment changes, and they're probably drivers of that, and we really can do a better job of understanding what they are. And then finally, entrainment is an issue because it affects the population. So we try and, an individual fish getting entrained is not an issue, but a population that becomes non-viable is an issue. And one of the problems with entrainment or with any population studies is populations, the margin between being viable and non-viable is often a fine line. So if this, relatively speaking, small entrainment, small is kind of a loose word there, you can easily tip the balance. So quantifying entrainment and having better science underlying those assumptions and calculations is important. And then finally, population diversity. The fish populations have reduced diversity, and this diversity influences the population fitness. As long as the environment is sort of non-changing and continuing in exactly the same way, then maybe that doesn't matter too much. But clearly it does, because the environment doesn't stay the same. The climate change came up, the watershed management, natural variability, many different aspects to it. So you want a diverse population can respond to changing conditions. And this gets then back to the climate change idea as well, of populations which are resilient to changing conditions, whether it's coming from the watershed or whether it's coming from a global climate change. So what is the science there is to identify and to describe diversity. So both fish monitoring and lab experiments to understand this diversity. What diversity do we have in the population? Secondly, to relate it to habitat diversity, both in a time and space. So not every piece of water is the same, and not every season is the same. And then finally, the environmental drivers, which are the primary parameters in terms of how they relate to fish diversity. So, for example, if you consider flow, there are many different metrics or characteristics of it: the frequency of it, the duration of a flow event, the timing, what season it comes in, how rapidly it changes. And so one would want to understand how important each of those are to the diversity. So then just in summary, those are the 6 key points that we feel like if with improved science we could reduce uncertainty in a way that would be really useful to management, allow one to know better the benefits, know better the surprise unintended negative consequences, allow better to trade off different benefits one from the other and against cost of different options. The first is models that resolve more of the fish environment interaction. Second is field evaluation of an ongoing experiment of changing flow all the time. Third is a recognition of the importance of the ocean, which we don't know well enough. And fourth is the recognition of the importance of nutrients and plankton, which clearly are changing, but we don't know quite to what extent they're driving fish changes. Fifth is finer knowledge and a more, what's the word, a more reliable knowledge, if you like, on entrainment numbers. and sixth is the issue of population diversity. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Hoppen, board, and board staff. I'm Randall Baxter, and I'll be presenting on the third theme, Key Emerging Science. The first sub-theme is that pelagic fishes are more flexible in their habitat use than previously understood. Much of our current understanding of pelagic fish abundance trends and their relationships with flow are based on surveys, sampling in the upper estuary, primarily in deep channels. Sorry. Yeah.
Could you get closer to the microphone?
Sure. I can't tell how close I am because I'm not getting any feedback. Okay. So most of our information is based on survey sampling in deep water in the upper estuary, but recent studies suggest that a number of pelagic fishes are more flexible in their habitat use, both in terms of lateral distribution and longitudinal or upstream downstream distribution than we previously understood. Summer et al. And there's Summer et others, 2011A, the references in our written submission, identified that striped bass are now primarily found in the shoal areas. They start out as juveniles as pelagic fish and historically made a living in the center of the channel, but now most of them are being found along the shorelines. So this is a new, well, not necessarily a new observation, but the fact that the remaining population is there is important to consider. Similarly, longfin smelt distribution has shifted from upstream rearing areas to downstream, deeper and saltier areas. Wim Kimmer provided a slide on this in his presentation in the first workshop. Threadfin shad, whose distribution was primarily centered in the central delta, are now not found there in any great numbers anymore, but recent new sampling in the Cache Slough and Sacramento Deepwater Ship Channel area is finding very high densities there at times. So they haven't necessarily changed their distribution. We've lost a lot of them in the central and south delta, but they still are persistent in the north delta. And finally, delta smelt, though they're primarily found in the low salinity zone and areas adjacent upstream and down, have also been found in the Cache Slough area and are residing there in the summertime. So that's another new understanding that we have about their habitat. So these fishes are examples of flexibility that's occurred over time with changing conditions. Our second theme is that regime change may mute beneficial flow effects. The Bay Delta system has several species that exhibit persistent significant flow abundance relationships. These include longfin smelt, starry flounder, American shad, and splittail, and historically included young striped bass. Over the past 45 years, these relationships have exhibited two distinct declines. The first, after the introduced clam Patama corbula amurensis came into the system, and the second in the early 2000s, which has become known as the pelagic organism decline. And here on the graphics, I'm showing the pre-clam or abundance outflow relationship for longfin, the post-clam relationship, and the current one after pod. As you can see in each era, there were significant, the lines indicate significant relationships, and one persists currently, although the range of abundance available for the levels of outflow is much less. So this may portend for the future